Oh, hello everyone. Hi Peter. Good evening. Welcome. This is the second webinar in our series of 2 webinars on breaking into post. And if you'd like to watch the first one, it's also on the YouTube channel. My name is Eleanor and I'm a Screen Skills Edit Trainee in TV drama, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here and host our Q&A with our industry experts from feature films, factual and TV drama. So I'm going to now introduce everyone. So introduce our wonderful panel. We have Ricardo Bacigalupo, who has worked as a first assistant editor on feature films including Mission Impossible Fallout, War Machine and Kingsman, The Secret Service. Ricardo is also the secretary of the post-production and facilities branch of BECTU. Toby Nutter is a documentary editor who has worked on the Channel 4 series 24 Hours in A&E, History Hunter and 999 What's Your Emergency. Naomi Smallwood is an assembly editor and first assistant editor in TV drama. She has worked on shows including Humans, Chimerica, and Cleaning Up. And Jasmin John is a first assistant editor with experience in feature films and TV drama, including Tin Star, Liar, and Horrible Histories, the movie Rotten Romans. Thank you so much for giving up your time today.
Hey guys, thanks for having us.
Hey, no problem.
Wow, we sounded really unenthusiastic then, didn't we?
Great start.
It's great to see have a wide variety of people from all across the industry on the call, and it should be very interesting to see different perspectives and talk to you all about how you broke in. So, breaking in to the film and TV industry is very well known for not having one way of doing things. We're not doctors, we don't go to university for X number of years, then choose A, B, or C. It's not like that in film and TV, as everyone watching will definitely know. And this can be quite intimidating for some people who are coming into the industry, but it can also be quite freeing. So I'd love to know if we'd like to go around the panel, and I'd like to start with you, Ricardo. How did you break into the industry, and what was your pathway that took you to where you are now?
Sure. I think you're absolutely right. It's one of the great things about the industry is the fact that there's no wrong way to do this. There's just your way. And it's something that I heard when I was starting out, you know, listening to people talk and listening to podcasts and stuff as well. So I say this to everyone whenever I do anything public, or when I say something, it's to do with me and my journey and my route. You know, if it's useful to you guys, take it on board and use it. If it's not useful, ignore it and, you know, do what's right for you, because this is just my experience. So I started studying film at university. I did film theory, and then I got into the production side, you know, myself. It was a non-practical course, but I was interested in editing, and that's how I got started. When I finished the degree, I worked as a runner in Soho in a post house, and I did it for about 5 months, and then I quit because it was a horrible, horrible experience. And it was one of those things that's necessary, but I wouldn't, you know, I didn't enjoy it. And I'm sure we'll get into that later based on some of the questions we've got about what that's like. And then briefly, I went back to uni to try and study something production related, but I got the opportunity to work in a TV production company, actually. And I took a job there for a year and went from there to my first film, which was being the trainee on X-Men First Class. And it was one of those situations where one of the people working at this TV company knew Eddie Hamilton, who had just finished editing Kick-Ass at this point in time. So I just managed to get a connection because I worked really hard for the company, the TV company that I was doing. So sort of as a thank you, they put me in touch with Eddie. And you mentioned Eddie and his website on the last post-production breaking in system as well. And he's very generous with his time digitally and in-person interviews and so on. And I got a meeting with him. We had breakfast. He was editing this low-budget feature because he wanted something a little less stressful after the first Kick-Ass. We got on, and then a few months later, he offered me a job as the trainee on X-Men, and we just connected as people, both in terms of our interests in editing and creativity and technology. And so I was very fortunate that he kept offering me work, and I pretty much worked mainly with him for the last 10 years, apart from a couple of films where when our schedules didn't line up, then I went off and did something else with a different editor, and, you know, he was doing something else. And then that kind of coalesced, and the most recent thing we did together was Mission Fallout. And that was pretty much my path. I won't go into any more detail because we'll touch on some of the other stuff in the questions, I'm sure.
Thank you so much. Toby, what about you? How did you break in?
So when I was about 15, I walked into an edit suite that they had them at my school. They had a media department at my school. I walked into the suite and went, this is amazing. It's a mix of creative. It's what I want to do. I decided there and then I was going to be a video editor of some sort. So I did a media GCSE and then A-level, and then I did a media degree that was, I specialized in TV production. It was a mixture of practical and theory. From there, I got my first job at Maverick TV, who were famous for making embarrassing bodies at the time. I spent a year and a half there as kind of a technical assistant, and then moved to London, where I spent 3 years working in post houses as an edit assistant. From there, I went freelance as an assistant editor, working on obs docs such as 999 Watch Your Emergency and 24 Hours in A&E. Because at that point, I'd narrowed it down eventually to observational documentary is what I wanted to cut. And I was fortunate enough that on 24 Hours in A&E, they have a kind of scheme where they train their assistants up to be able to edit. And so after a year and a half on that, I think, I got my first editor credit. And so since then, I've just been cutting documentaries.
That's amazing. Thank you. Naomi.
Hi, I'm just going to very quickly apologise in advance for any breaks in transmission. I've just started having a few internet problems, so if I repeat anything anyone said or appear to not be responding, that's why. But hopefully we're all good now. Yes, so I would say I sort of inched rather than broke into the industry. When I finished college, I took a year out because I wasn't quite sure exactly what I wanted to do. I spent a year doing youth work for a church, so something very different, but part of that was a lot of video content, and I found myself spending more and more time cutting videos, much more time cutting videos than I was with young people. So I sort of realised from there that maybe that's the sort of thing I wanted to do, and I sort of love TV drama. So I didn't know where on earth to start. I didn't have the wonder of things like today. So I did a degree in post-production at Ravensbourne University, which I can massively recommend for anyone who's sort of looking to build up some creative or technical skills for TV. It was, I wouldn't be here without it. From there, I really knew that at that point I wanted to cut specifically that part of post-production, and I also knew that I really wanted to work in TV drama. So I got a running job at a post-production company who are now called Encore. From there, I spent about a year there. I spent 7 months running, and then I did some digital archiving and tech hopping. Finally managed to get on what is now called Screen Skills, what at the time was called Skill Set, but it's the same trainee scheme. Got a job on a show called Fortitude, and that was very much through my contacts from being a runner. They got my Skill Set Screen Skills CV, but I sort of went to the top of the pile because I'd been serving them tea and coffee for months, and they'd seen me rise up through this post-production facility. So they only really spoke to me about that job. And from there, I've just sort of, I did one job as a trainee, I did several as a second assistant, and then from there I'm first assisting and grabbing whatever chance I can to do a bit of assembling as well.
Thank you so much. Jasmin?
Yeah, so my path is slightly similar to Naomi's. I did a degree in digital film production at Ravensbourne. I didn't really get into editing until my third year. That's when I did a post-production specialism unit, and I was like, this is it, this is what I want to do. And then shortly after graduating in 2017, I applied to the Screen Skills Trainee Finder Scheme. At the time, it was also a creative skill set. And I joined as an edit trainee. And then my first trainee job was on Horrible Histories, the movie. My second trainee job was on an ITV drama called Wild Bill. And I've been in TV ever since through word of mouth recommendations, and I've progressed from a trainee up to a second, and then most recently a first.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
This is quite odd. Am I right in thinking we all went and did a university degree before going into the industry? This is, I tell you, most of the editors I know or have come across and asked when I was making my way up, most of them didn't go to university. So I have to say this is, I think this is quite a rarity that we've all done a degree. You need to do a degree to get into TV.
Yeah,
despite what this looks like.
That's really interesting. Because I didn't, I'm the one person in the webinar. Yeah, that will be really interesting. There's so many different ways that people can get into post, which is amazing and also very challenging, but it's also brilliant because there's so many different ways you can go in. Toby, you mentioned that you worked as an edit assistant, and one thing I think which comes up quite a lot is what is the difference between being an edit assistant in a post house and assistant editing, and how can we transition from being an edit assistant into assistant editing?
Okay, so as an edit assistant in a post house, you are one of a team of people, and you'll probably be on shifts, and you might be divided across different buildings. Sometimes you specify just on one area of post, maybe in audio or offline or online. But generally, you are there to process rushes, do exports, conforms sometimes, and so on. And it's very much a technical role. You're not really involved in a project. Sometimes you might be sort of dedicated to a project, but most of the time you're working across almost everything and anything a post house has on their books at the time. I mean, the next bit will differ very much between us, but for a factual assistant editor, you do some of those things sometimes, depending on how much involvement the post house has with that program. But mostly you're sort of more organizing projects for editors. In factual TV, you really only get assistant editors on really big shows with lots of footage. So 999 and A&E, two classic things. They shoot on multiple cameras across various locations for days on end. And there's just a wealth of footage. And in order to get from that massive footage to something you can actually edit with, you kind of need a filtration system. And edit assistants are that sort of filtration. It's finding the footage, it's putting all the stuff from stories together. There might be a story, like on 999, for example, there might be something where they film someone on one day and then this character crops up almost a month later, and then there's the bit where they find them later on in the day for some reason, for whatever's going on. But the editor needs all of that, and it's spreading across the project. So it's organizing things, but then also sometimes doing some of the sort of exports, grouping and syncing of things. And then you might also do like cut downs. So again, there's a lot of the footage, and producers and sometimes editors just want to see like a snippet to be able to gauge that story's worth and what the content is. And your job will then be to sort of cut it down to something that just gives you an overview of the story. So very much in a post house, you're kind of a cog in a machine, for want of a better phrase. Your tech support, basically, in some sense, making sure the ads are prepped and set up for the editors and so on and so forth. Whereas as an assistant editor on a program, you're involved in that program, and decisions you make actually start to have an effect on the program, sometimes, if you're lucky. But I gather that's quite different for everyone else.
Yeah, I think the key difference, right? I mean, I haven't done the role of the edit assistant myself, but I think the key difference you kind of touched on there is if you're an edit assistant, you're working in a post house and you're employed by the post house. So you go where they tell you and you do what they ask you to do, and your shift patterns are designed and built by the post house, and you're across multiple productions. Whereas I think we'd probably agree, right? The majority of assistant editors are probably freelance, and you can be an assistant editor and go into a post house and do some freelance work, a week here, a day there, whatever, and be paid by the post house if they need people on an extra project. Or, I mean, my only experience, and probably the same for you guys, is usually we work with an editor or we work with particular editors, and we are working on a film or a TV show, and we're specific to that thing. We are solely focused onto that film or television program or documentary, and ideally we live, breathe, and sleep it from a technical and creative perspective as much as possible to support the editor. And obviously how much you're doing that is dependent on your position in the team and the responsibility you have to do that. But I think edit assistant is a great job to get at some point, but obviously I think the focus is looking at that as a stepping stone if you want to get into feature cutting rooms or TV cutting rooms, or even docs, because obviously big docs like Amy and Senna, they have cutting room teams of like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people, depending on the size and budget of the documentary. So you can learn a lot by doing that. And obviously I'm going to bring up Eddie a lot in this because I've spent most of my career working with him, but one of the things he has written in his website, which you touched on, Eleanor, he has a thing. I think he likes to try and hire people who've had at least 1 or 2 years experience as an edit assistant in their post house, just because then the knowledge they will have and the technical skills they'll have had and the interesting they've done and the file formats they've worked with and just the variety of skills and disciplines that have developed by doing that will then make them sort of fast track themselves into his cutting room, for example. Obviously that's not true for all editors because everybody's different and the demands each editor has is going to be different per the cutting room, but that's just one example of how you could start as an edit assistant and then develop into going freelance and being an assistant editor, if that helps with clarifying the difference as well in kind of my world.
Yeah, and just to bounce off of that, just in terms of what you want to do, I mean, I think most people here probably want to go into like assistant editing and then editing, but if you want to go into something like online editing or into sound, right, or maybe perhaps even VFX, then stick with the edit assisting rather than trying to jump out of the to be an assistant editor and freelance, because you're more likely to be bundled in with that post house and you're more likely to get trained up to do that sort of online editing side of things. And just, I noticed the question was, is one higher valued? They're both vital. We need them both. One is possibly kind of seen as more valued than the other, but the reality is it would be lost without either role.
Yeah, there'd just be a lot of maybe non-technical editors sort of querying how to do things to a certain extent. But then, and just again, to be clear, just because not everyone knows and everyone's knowledge base is different, because I think this is a little bit more gray now, but editors are paid to be storytellers. I know that sounds like a simple point, but I think sometimes that can get lost when people don't really understand the role. Editors are paid to be storytellers and they're hired for their skills as a storyteller. And anything technical they have on top of that and can bring to the table is like a bonus. The assistants team, 1, 2, 3, however many of them, we're there to provide support for that editor in both a creative and a technical role. And often the two things will merge and overlap and people lean maybe one way or the other depending on their background and their strengths. But it's a common misconception that I've heard a number of times on interviews or podcasts where people think editors, I don't know, they seem to just not really quite understand editing, and that is a storytelling role, that is a creative role. And in my opinion, arguably one of the most important parts of the process, because that person watches every frame of footage and crafts the story with the director and probably spends more time like going across the footage than anyone else does.
And in feature films, in comparison to TV, as assistant editors, how technical are your roles, and how does that compare to being in factual?
Is that for me? Are you starting with me or one of the others?
Sure. What kind of responsibilities do you have as assistants?
I can, talking of film, then again, it depends purely on the editor and what their requirements are for how they run their cutting room. I connected with Eddie and worked with him for such a long time because he's an incredibly technical editor. I don't know if any of you have watched some of the talks he's done on YouTube or just some of the interviews and stuff he's done with Steve Holfish on the Pro Video Coalition. Like, he started off as his own assistant to a certain extent, I think, because, the film industry's changed dramatically in the last 20 years, just as an industry. And then obviously with technology having such an impact it was as well, when he started in film and when editors of his age started in the industry, we didn't have, the camera was not a computer, which is what it is now. So obviously that changes everything. So he started on low budget films. And so he was his own assistant, and therefore he knew everything an assistant editor needed to do, as well as everything an editor does, and was equal parts technical and equal parts creative. And therefore, when he's prepping his cutting rooms, he's looking for people who can be just as creative and just as technical to kind of fit into that puzzle piece. But obviously different editors are going to want different things. So I think the more you know technically as assistant editor, the stronger you're going to be and the more capable you're going to be as a worker, but it's not essential. And on stuff with budgets, and when you start working in mid to high end TV and especially feature films, you always have a hire company who provide normally provide your avids and all your equipment for you as well, but they're also a support line that you can call and check in with them and ask them questions. The main difference is just that there's usually a little bit of a delay on that because they're a hire company and they're servicing multiple films or TV shows. Whereas if you can handle it in the cutting room yourself, then you can basically just maybe get to the solution or fix the problem that little bit quicker. But by no means is it essential. And I would say, and sometimes if you're too technical, but you are interested in editing, you can kind of derail into becoming a very capable technical assistant editor or first assistant, and then not have the opportunity to be assembling or cutting. It's so specific to the team and the people you're working with and how the roles break down and who likes doing what. You guys jump in on TV.
Yeah, I mean, I think the TV versus film question is really interesting because I think perhaps it's less in terms of how creative your role is. I think it's perhaps less about whether you're on a film or on TV and more about the scale and budget of what you're working on. If you're working on a massive Hollywood movie and you're like a third or second assistant editor, you're like a cog in a machine and you're going to be sinking rushes. And that's like a great stepping stone. And, you know, that's absolutely brilliant. And you're probably paid a lot better to do it as well. But if you're working on maybe like an indie movie, or if you're working on kind of smaller scale television drama, you're more likely to, first of all, rise up those assisting ranks a bit quicker and get closer to that creative things. But also just because you're part of a smaller team, people are more likely to call on you, and they're more likely to get to know you as well and be like, well, are you interested in editing? Would you like to have a go at cutting some scenes? So, I mean, I'd say, and certainly in recent years, the lines between TV and film are really blurred. And in terms of your role and how creative it is, it's far more about scale and who you're working with and who you are than it is about which side you're on.
No, I agree completely. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Riccardo, I'd be interested to know about feature in terms of TV drama, how the workflow is different. Because from what I know, in terms of like turnovers, you know, doing it in reels as opposed to episodic if you're doing TV drama, how does that workflow differ to TV drama? I'm curious to know, and I'm sure, you know, others would be too.
Yeah, I can answer that fairly accurately because in relation to what you were just saying, Naomi, about being a cog in a machine, a little bit more in a big feature film, then I'm actually, before the pandemic kind of ground us to a halt, I took a job as a first assistant on a TV show, a high-end drama TV show, for the first time because I wanted to get some experience in that world to be able to compare the difference, because so many people had said to me, there's just more room to play. You know, there's more experience. And again, it's not true for all films, but the big features that I was working on, Mission Impossible, the Kingsman films, War Machine for Netflix, my role as the first assistant there is essentially to facilitate workflow with the post supervisor, and the editor is doing the creative work. To a certain extent, that's a role I like to slot into as well, and it's a role I became very good at through my experience with Eddie. So the two things kind of impacted each other. You know, I could have been a non-technical first assistant and been more focused on the creative stuff, and then probably would have found more time to do creative stuff, such as maybe assembling some scenes if the editor needed. But I like technology, so I gravitated towards it. In terms of your question about the workflow and stuff, then I found them to be pretty similar, actually. I'm working on Pennyworth at the moment, season 2, which is a Warner Brothers show. The Alfred Butler character from the Batman mythology. And so that I would class it, I think that's high-end TV. We have a digital lab doing our rushes, you know, essentially in terms of the workflow, it's basically like what we would do on a feature film, but scaled down. And obviously the biggest adaptation for me is the fact that I'd say it's a little less hierarchical. And obviously I'm having to, you know, learn to a system where we've got multiple editors and the whole concept of blocks and episodes and assistants looking after their editor, and then seconds who are shared with kind of the whole team. Those are adaptations. Whereas on feature, most of the films I've done with Eddie, he's been the only editor apart from one, I think, on the first Kingsman. He cut that with John Harris, but other than that, he's cut everything himself. So there has been a more linear system where, you know, he kind of sets the show as the editor, that splits out to me and Tom as the firsts, and we then run the cutting room and delegate out the work. So we work in reels, as you said. Each one is about 20 minutes long. I've been wondering about that. I kind of feel like you could do that with TV as well and just do 3 20-minute reels rather than one 60-minute or 50-minute sequence. It's less of an issue now technically because of the whole computers just getting more powerful and can handle it more. But I just think, 3 20-minute sequences is a little easier to work with than, I'm getting nerdy now and getting very technical in terms of the specifics of how we work in an Avid, but just working in 20-minute sequences is just easier. And also you can get reels exporting at the same time across multiple machines in the cutting room when you're on a Nexus. So there's a lot of benefit to it. And I found it interesting adapting to that with TV, because it's like, we need to cater for the time it's going to take to prepare and output this 50, 60-minute sequence versus three 20-minute ones that I can run multiply. In terms of turnovers, I've been able to take my systems and my presets and my templates and everything from what we've built on features and essentially apply to high-end TV and adapt and just tweak and modify, but my watermarks are the same, my burn-ins are the same, all my presets are the same. It's just a case of adapting to the fact that essentially me and Tom would, to a certain extent, dictate, the Nexus, the folder structures, the file naming, the formats and everything for the film, because there's just the one film that you have to deal with. So you can kind of run it from the top down and everyone suggests things and then we slot into a workflow that we've all built together. Whereas everyone works differently in TV. So it's kind of like little pockets or arms of an octopus, and the octopus is the TV show. That's kind of how I might describe it. It's been a really fun experience and a really fun kind of experience to branch out and learn some different ways of doing it. And I picked up some great stuff from Rob Duffield, who was on one of these a couple of weeks ago, and just listening to other people talking, this is how we do it in TV. Okay, this is how we do it in film. Like, let me show you some stuff, you show me some stuff. It's been really fun. But I think if you've done high-end TV, you can comfortably move back and forth between the two. The hours are certainly better in TV. That's the other thing I would say. The hours are much better.
I had the opposite experience. I did a couple of weeks on a film, and I found, it was quite near the beginning of the process. I found that I was doing much nicer hours for more money.
That perfect example of how it's always it's always different.
Always different. And also just to pick up, because it sounds like when you're working in TV, you tend to work on shows where it's like each editor or each block has their own assistant.
Right.
Traditionally in TV drama, the way it works is that you have, like, say it's an 8-episode series and you have 4 editors over. You have all the assistants work for everyone.
Okay,
and
interesting.
The first assistant will be overall responsible for the workflow, so how things are named and how you're going to do things, and then they will kind of dictate that, and everyone else will work within their system. I think what's changed in the last few years, I think it kind of started with Crown, is that where American money's come in, American systems have come in, and the American system is to have an assistant per editor, and certainly like editors who have come over here from America
will be used to that, right?
They're just not going to put up with sharing an assistant between 2 or 3 other editors at a time. I certainly think it's, for a drama that has the budget, it's a really nice way of working, just to work with one drama. But certainly when I started off in shows like, Fortitude, Church, Humans, that was, we were all working for everyone.
Yeah. The money very much dictates, I think, the system and the workflow and how you can, number of people you can have and how you can do that. So yeah, it's very specific.
Just to jump in on money, I would say that the biggest difference between factual TV and film or drama is money. Like I said, most factual TV doesn't actually have an assistant on it, and those that do. So when I was on A&E, there was a point where we had 19 editors and 4 assistants. But then I've worked on a series of 999 where we had maybe only a dozen editors, but we had like half a dozen assistants. And at that time we were able to go, okay, well, that assistant is these 2 edits, and they kind of split it so that, one of their editors was near the end of his project and the other one was near the beginning, so they didn't have just too much going on at once. And then sometimes it'll be, there is one assistant and just a variety of editors, I don't know how many, and you've kind of got to deal with all of them. But then their needs are fewer, and there is a post house usually that's then doing all the kind of technical stuff of ingesting and exporting all those kinds of things. So that's the biggest difference, I would say, between the 2 areas, fiction and factual.
So with high-end TV and feature films, and also documentary, how many assistants you have in the team will definitely depend on the budget. And so when you're hiring trainees, and I'd be interested to know if documentary, do they have post-production assistants, or is it just the edit assistants?
You sometimes get junior, like quite new members, like on a team of, so on 999, there was the two of us who were very experienced, like 3 or 4 of us who were quite experienced, and then a couple of people who weren't very experienced. And so we were kind of training them up as we went. But that was a rare case. I think on A&E, to my knowledge, they've only had one time where someone joined not really knowing Avid very much. Everyone else has already had a fair amount of experience before they work on that show, because it's quite difficult to do without experience. I would tend to say, if you don't have experience, you need to work in a post house as an edit assistant first. And that's where you get the experience to then go freelance. But I know that's different for the fictional guys.
When you are hiring trainees or post PAs, or even, well, not so second assistants, more the really junior people, and you're receiving all the CVs in, what kind of qualities and skills do you look for, as well as Avid?
From my point of view, a lot of it is, do I want to spend hours and hours in a potentially quite small room with this person? That can't be overstated. It's just, you can teach technical skills and you can teach people the way the industry works, and you can certainly take that into account when you're looking at CVs. But for me, I would never want to work with anyone before having at least a quick chat with them, just to make sure we're going to be okay together, because it can be a long hours industry. Depending on the budget of the show, you might be in quite a small room next to each other, and you've got to be able to get on, and you've got to work with someone who is going to work with you. So I mean, by all means, get as much technical background as possible. That's really going to help you out, and it's going to make you feel less in deep end, certainly. But just kind of try and be a person that people want to work with, and that gets you a long way in TV.
Yeah, I think I definitely echo what Naomi said, that people just like positive people, and I think they'd be more inclined to hire you with less experience if you're just someone that's good to work with, if you're just a nice person. A lot of the time, like, your personality will just get you in, and then you can learn the technical later. Because I know when I started, I didn't know Avid at all. I learned on Premiere at uni, so it was like I'm learning from the assistants that are teaching me, that are willing to show me. So yeah, it was all about me being like this positive and bubbly person, someone they want to spend 6, 7, 8 hours in the office with, in like a tiny room, So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think personality definitely plays a huge part. I think it's, again, this is the good and bad thing about the industry and the maybe slightly lax hiring systems that it has, and it's something that we're working hard to address at BECTU as well. And obviously, given the current situation and equality coming up a lot, then it's something that needs to be really thought about and looked at hard across the entire industry. And it is starting to do. And in the 10 years that I've been in the industry, I've seen a change, definitely, and more so in the last, I would say, 3 to 4 years than in the previous sort of 5 to 6. I think when you're coming into the industry, again, I'm talking from a feature perspective here primarily because that's my background, but it probably is some parallels. I think, yeah, personality plays an important part, but not everyone is going to get on with everyone. So if you don't get a job, or if something happens to you where you don't get what you were really excited about something, ask for feedback. Get as much useful information out of that as you can, but don't let it knock you down as much as you can stay positive, because it's impossible for people not to think about the fact, again, I'm talking from a features here, an editing job in feature is like usually minimum 6 months, probably longer, sometimes 9, 10, 11, 12. The longest job I had was the first Kingsman, which was like 18 months. I literally started on day 1 of prep, and my last job was QCing the final DCP of the movie in Leicester Square whilst they were building the premiere outside, like around for all of the celebrities and stuff to come. So sometimes it can literally be that long. And you can even keep working afterwards if you have to do stuff for the studio with the Blu-ray and the home video release and stuff. So the jobs can last for a long time. And for me, obviously, who I'm going to be in a room with it is an important factor. I'm not going to pretend it's not. But I think that has led to situations in the industry where people can be maybe overly selective in their hiring process, and it can lead to repetitive systems taking place. So I'm hoping that is changing, and it's something I'm thinking about all the time now in the last couple of years. And the other thing for me personally, being an assistant on a film, it is you are a cog in a system. I'm not looking at show reels and checking whether people can edit, because to just be blunt, I don't care. You're not editing the feature. There's someone who has a lot more experience than you being hired to do that. And if you get on as a trainee, you know, you'll have access to the footage if the editor is okay with that. And if you know how to use the Avid properly, and you know how to lock your bins, and you know how to just work around the Avid and on the Nexus properly, no one is going to have an issue with you in your own time, cutting some stuff together and then presenting it to an editor if they have time to look at it and give you some feedback. You know, Eddie was always very encouraging of us to try and do that in our own time. And he was always fine to look at stuff and give suggestions and stuff. The reality of the situation is that people just very rarely have the time to do that, because there's just so much to do. If you're working as an assistant on a big feature, the other thing to just be aware of is there's a lot of deliverable requirements that the studio require. And so as an assistant, you really can be sucked up in workflow and making sure that from sort of the prep through to the end of the film, you're doing what's necessary workflow wise to tick all the boxes for the studio deliverables. I think it's a little bit more flexible in TV, and then maybe it's a little bit less in terms of requirements. For example, code books, they seem to come up sometimes in TV and not in others. On a feature film, it's a necessity. You know, for those of you who don't know what a code book is, it's usually a FileMaker database, which is converted into a standalone application at the end of the film project, so that anyone in the film studio has a log and a list of all the assets and literally every frame of footage that was shot for that production, from the specific footage for that story to reusable assets like generic establishers and exteriors that can be repurposed across different projects for that studio, because obviously they own the rights to that footage when they've shot it. And so you can automate a lot of it, but it's still a fairly time-consuming process. And there's just a lot to do with workflow. I mean, we don't really have time to go into it in loads of detail on a webinar like this, but even though the lab have automated a lot of the process and syncing the rushes for you now in a way that they didn't used to, then there's just a lot to do to tick those deliverables boxes. So I'm interested when I'm hiring, and I'm not speaking for all first assistants here, I'm just speaking for myself. I'm looking for people with strong computing skills, strong Avid skills, strong technical skills, just good all-rounders, and also good communication skills, the ability to be able to, you know, efficiently and effectively receive instructions, take instructions, suggest things. Confidence is good, but obviously overconfidence is not. You know, there's a whole thing about cutting room etiquette, which we can all probably get into with regards to kind of do's and don'ts in features in TV cutting rooms and docs as well, about kind of just things you learn and no one teaches you at film school or in university. I didn't get taught any of it because none of the lecturers knew, because they didn't work in the industry. And a lot of it's common sense, but a lot of it you just learn by just being a trainee and working your way up and seeing how other people react, and seeing people say something stupid and going, oh, I'm not going to do that, or, you know, whatever is required. So show reels and editing, if that's your passion, obviously do it. You know, free time, weekends, be editing as much as you can, short films in between jobs, work with your friends and your colleagues and bring yourself up and move up together. But honestly, for me, I'm not looking for people with super amazing editing creative skills as an assistant, because that's not the job on features.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, especially on the point of kind of show reels and stuff and CVs. If I'm looking at kind of, I don't know, 3 or 4 CVs, and 2 of them are kind of like, I've not been in the industry long, or I'm perhaps not barely started in the industry, and I've got another couple that are like, I'm an editor and I'm a director, and, you know, I'm a super creative person and I've done all this, I'm far more likely to go to the person who perhaps has less experience, but looks like they're going to be far more easy to mold into someone who is going to be great in the cutting room. I mean, I've been in the industry, 7 years now. I'm just starting to get asked about kind of show reels and extracts, and that's because I'm at the point where I'm applying for or trying to step into that kind of editing side of things. But when you're starting out, I would hone your CV to, you know, what experience have you had in post houses? Have you done work experience there? Have you done running jobs? You know, what time have you spent in the cutting room? What are your technical skills? Because they're just, you know, at the assisting level, and especially at the very junior levels and assisting, that's what's going to really kind of get your foot in the door.
Thank you.
Toby?
I mean, it's entirely different. I would say, yeah, generally for docs, it's you learn all the technical stuff in the in a post house, and they're just sort of instantly transferable into working on docs, and the thing is, I mean, some docs like A&E is the sort of thing that the technical side of cutting it is something you cannot learn anywhere else other than working on that show, because it's quite specialist in the fact that there's just hundreds of cameras constantly rolling across several departments. It's a very different beast. A lot of these things, it's big multi-camera stuff, and you're working with big. You'll have 9 or so clips in a multicam clip, so you won't I'll echo what other people are saying in that cut anytime you can, get as much experience cutting in any way you can, but that's not what any of us is looking for in an assistant of any sort. In a more experienced assistant, then yes, we're looking for sort of what their storytelling is like, whether they can spot a story. It's not so much telling a story, it's spotting a story. Because like I said, you're watching all the footage to spot the stories. And sometimes, there'll be helpful logs that tell you where things happen and so on. But often it is just trawling through it. I mean, with A&E, often it does feel like you are literally just watching through a whole load of CCTV, waiting for something to happen. And then you've got to see whether that is interesting and could make good telly or not. But again, that's a little bit further down the line. I think right at the beginning, it's technically, how well do you know Avid and the various things you'll need to do to assist?
We've mentioned hierarchy, and I think one thing that's probably, as we said, not talked about at uni is the politics within cutting rooms and the hierarchy. And Toby, I was wondering, in documentary, when you're hiring a trainee, what would you tell them what they should and shouldn't do when they start on their first job?
Tricky. I mean, so editors tend not to be the ones hiring in documentary. It's production managers and along with series producers and exec producers. But often we're asked if we know any of good assistants, and usually it's people we've worked with before. So again, they've kind of got experience. Yeah, I don't know, tricky one. Come back to me. I'll think on it.
Sorry, go on, Eleanor. Go on.
If you were hiring a trainee onto your feature films, what would you, if you had to create a handbook for them to take them through what they should and shouldn't do in the cutting room, what would your handbook say?
In terms of hierarchy and in terms of the politics side of things. I think the biggest thing that I picked up on quite early when I was a trainee and I was coming up the ranks was learn what you can about personalities and people and understanding how people work, because film is a people-orientated medium. What we do in post-production and the software and the editing it's kind of only 50% of the work, maybe less, maybe more. I mean, it's going to change per job, but when you're a trainee, it's your responsibility to work out how to get on with the first and the second, just as much as it's their responsibility to understand you and where you're coming from and getting on with them. And obviously in a really functioning, great cutting room team, everyone will get to know each other and understand each other and talk to each other and just learn about each other, especially if you're spending months at a time in there. This is where prep is really useful. And prep is something that I have to fight for as a first assistant on everything I've been involved in. Feature films, I think, you'll get a week or two at most. I would argue you need more than that sometimes, depending on the complications and how complicated the workflow is. But there are so many factors outside of your control that impact how much prep you can get. But prep is a time to be able to spend a bit of time getting to know your team. Often, if you're hiring new people, beyond the interview, you haven't had the chance to do that. I just think back to the first Kingsman film. I remember we did have a week's prep, and I remember we had a great moment where we were all able to sit down together at a table and talk about how we wanted to work and talk about the Avid and the project and the layout, but also it was an opportunity for people to just get to know each other a bit. And it really helps with them when you hit the ground running with rushes. Because once the shoot starts on a feature film, and once, you know, you get 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes 20 cameras rolling on things, then the volume of rushes that are coming in is just crazy, especially now that everything's gone digital. And, you know, the filmic kind of stop-start camera etiquette is also variable in terms of how much time is being spent rolling on the floor or rolling on, you know, stuff that arguably doesn't need to be filmed. But again, that's the stress of a shoot day, and it's sometimes not avoidable. So understanding all that is really important. And I think I would also say, in terms of outside of the cutting room, because obviously producers are going to come in, directors are going to come in, there's a lot of people from the non-cutting room environment who are going to come in. Try and understand where they're coming from, the day they've had, the world they've been in, the stress of a shoot day. Post is stressful, but I would say it's to a certain extent relatively calm, or there's an illusion of calm compared to working on the floor. And also the odds are that, I remember when I was young and on X-Men, you know, the people who are going to be coming in those important, more senior roles, they are from a different generation. A lot's changed from when they were our age to when we're now coming in as junior people, and the way people approach life is different. And so you even if we don't agree with everything that they may do or say, you need to know where they're coming from and understand them. And by understanding them, you can work more effectively with them, for them. Just knowing how to talk to them, you know, I think it's just a really important, and always err on the side of caution, because as a trainee, you are a junior member of the team. So check with your second, check with your first. If you're even in a slight bit of doubt about whether something's a good thing to say, then just check with someone you trust. I don't want to imply that you should be walking around on tiptoes around a cutting room, because you want to feel comfortable where you're working. But there is a hierarchy element that I think has stuck around in film a little bit longer than in other disciplines and in other parts of the industry. And there's some really great podcasts actually about baby boomers versus millennials, and just the differences in personality and understanding each other and the different generations we come from. And I just think that kind of stuff I'm just really interested in, just generally, and it just really helps with knowing how to talk to producers. Often they won't be technical people as well. They just care about their dailies and the iPad and why Pix isn't working. And so in a stressful moment like that, knowing how to be able to communicate with them effectively, you know, will work in your favor, especially if you can fix their problem quickly. They'll remember that. And then I've rambled a little bit, but I hope that kind of just gives an idea as to the kind of environment. Yeah,
the word hierarchy is a really interesting word, because you know, TV and film, they don't necessarily work in the same way like an office feel. Well, this is my boss, and then this is this person's boss, and it's kind of like, as an assistant, everyone's your boss. So if your title's assistant editor, so maybe most directly that, you know, that like your kind of first port of call is your boss, but the same. But you know, in the same breath, and kind of like Riccardo kind of touched on this, like the director's your boss, the producer's your boss, the execs are your boss, the post-production supervisor's your boss. And you can sometimes have all these requests coming in from lots of different directions, from lots of different people who are very busy, who don't necessarily understand that you're also very busy, and you're getting all these requests from multiple different places. And that's where the communication thing really comes in. It's like people don't want to grumpily be told like, no, or I can't do this, or, you know, do you understand how busy I am? But they totally get it if you just say, of course, I'll absolutely sort this for you. I've just got this to do because, you know, this person's really struggling with this at the moment, and I've just got to get this out the door, and I'm absolutely going to be with you next. And that, sort of sending those sorts of emails and having those sorts of phone conversations, it sort of becomes a bit of an art form of managing all these people who are in charge of you, and sort of kind of, you know, well, not managing them, but managing kind of what they need from you, and just sort of working with them. And like you said, you know, understanding the day they've had and where they're coming from. But I mean, first call, you're like a trainee or a second, first port of call will be the first assistant, and then after that, the editor. But the reality is you're going to be working with a lot of different people.
Yeah. I'd also just add to that as well, you know, although you have to, I said err on the side of caution, you know, read your contract as well, you know what your rights are just for yourself as well, and don't let people take the piss out of you, because, hey, you know, Me Too happened for a reason. Like, there is a lot of stuff going on in our industry that's not cool, it's not acceptable. And when days are stressful, people will speak to you in a certain way. And, you know, it's okay to go and tell your first this happened and to mention it and that it impacted you and how it made you feel and that it's not cool. Like, you need to know that it's okay to do that. And the union is here for this stuff too. Yeah. We've worked really hard in the union with PP&F especially to try and really start to change this stuff and give people somewhere they can talk. And I've had people call me directly as well to share experiences. And I hope we're creating an environment and a place of trust for all of us to be able to talk to each other and share stuff, just to not only help each other, but advise each other about these kind of experiences as we're working through them together to hopefully tell a good story and make a great film, you know, and at the end of the day, share experiences about what it is to be a person, because that's what filmmaking is. Jasmin, what about you? What's your take on all this?
Yeah, no, I think it's been summarized really well. I think it's just the idea of like reading the room. I think a great example is when like exec producers or directors are in for a screening and it's like, put your ear to the door. And if you hear playback, probably not a good idea to interrupt at that moment. You know, it's like, come back later, unless it's urgent. So yeah, I think it's just understanding that everyone has a role to fulfill. And if you ever get stuck or if you have any issues, then, you know, your first point of call is the first. And then it goes kind of up in a hierarchy where if the first's got an issue or they don't have the answer, then we go to the post supervisor. So there's a hierarchy there, but there's always like a level of support as well. Yeah, so you're never just kind of left in the lurch.
To come in on hierarchy, I think it's a bit different for factual. It's kind of flatter. I mean, yes, the exec and the sort of series senior producers are higher up, and yes, the editor is arguably higher up than an assistant, but at the same time, you're all doing different jobs. And actually each person can't do their job without the other person doing theirs. But also in factual, you're often working a lot with producers who aren't involved in the post process per se. It's more the compliance paperwork and various things like that you need to be able to go to them because you need stuff from them before you can go to someone else. And so it's a little bit different. And I think you can generally, again, read the room, see how busy people are and so on, but you can generally go to most people in the hierarchy for help or to ask for things or, you know, to get things done. It's a little bit more free, I think, in TV. As for some sort of bits of advice for sort of people when they're first starting as assistants, my number one, and this does come from an editor, is knock. Please knock the door before opening it. It's just a politeness thing, really, but also it will warn you if it's a good or bad time, because usually an editor, you'll knock on the door and the editor will go, oh, hey, come in, yeah, how's it doing? Whereas sometimes you'll just say yes, and that's kind of like that's a no, but I mean, go on then, be careful. And yeah, read the room. And but when people do then say, oh yeah, come and sit and I'll show you this, or sometimes they may even ask you, like, how did you group that together out of interest? Because they might want to be able to pick it apart, I guess. But take offers like that gladly. You know, if you're really busy, just I'd love to, but can I come back in a bit and do that? But otherwise, yeah, to take up any opportunity that you're offered and listen is the other thing I'd say.
Mm. Yeah,
I don't know.
You, as a job goes, sorry. As the job goes on, you know, you'll get to know the person that you're working with and working for, and the people that you're working with, and you know, as your career goes on, you will find people that you particularly like working with, and hopefully who particularly like working with you. And so the word hierarchy, I mean, it still exists. Your editor is still technically your boss, but it's going to be much more of a backwards forwards thing, because you respect them, they respect you. And, you know, it's not like, oh, I've got to knock on my boss's door now. It's, you know, of course, what everyone said about judging the room, and if they're in a screening, don't go there and all of that stuff. But, you know, I've got an editor who I've worked with on like 3 or 4 jobs now, and we just have, you know, a kind of really nice working relationship going. And again, it's just coming back down to that thing of people. You'll find who you like working with.
Yeah.
And when you get that flow, it's really lovely environment.
And the key thing is, to touch on what you were linking to there, the key thing is trust. People need to be able to trust each other. And it's one of those things that's really, it's just a weird thing about the industry. You know, the average shoot day on a film I read costs like $100,000 or pounds or something. So money makes people anxious. because of how much is being spent and how much it costs to redo something if mistakes are made. And therefore that creates an environment where people hire people they trust and keep hiring them because they trust them. And so this vicious loop starts where people keep working with the same people, which affects diversity and affects hiring and so on. But like at the same time, just from a purely logical perspective, you can understand why those decisions are made, because mistakes cost money. It's that simple. And obviously on the studio films and the level that I've worked at, those mistakes can be really big costs when they're made. So finding, the job as a young person coming in is to show you're responsible, show you're capable, show you're mature, and proving that you are someone who can be trusted with these responsibilities. And then as you rise up the ranks, it becomes your responsibility to find people who can do that too. And obviously, as we're all doing this, it's all our responsibilities to do that in a more diverse way as well.
When we are a trainee or a second assistant and we make a mistake, Jasmin, what would you suggest?
So I was actually gonna say that I think making a mistake is a great way to learn, and sometimes it might be a costly way to learn for the production, but I think any mistake can be rectified. And as a trainee, all you have to do is ask for help. So it's one of those things where it's like, don't be afraid to ask for help, because there's either a second there or there's a first assistant that's there to help you. They know how to fix it, they know how to rectify it. And then they can show you, how to do it the right way, so that you can be confident that you're not going to make the mistake again. So it's just a case of asking for help.
Yeah, and then if you're coming in, especially if you're coming in as a trainee and you're on a trainee rate, then any mistakes that are made and any costs like that, you're not responsible for that. You are, the first assistant is responsible for the cutting room, and then the editor, or like the backroom cutting room, and then ultimately the editor is your head of department. So that you can't, someone can't give you a huge dressing down for you've cost us X amount of money because you did that VFX this long, for example. It's like, well, why, if you're a trainee and it's your first ever job, why is your first assistant or at least the second assistant not checking it?
Right.
Because it's all very well asking someone to go into the deep end, which I think in some ways is the only way to learn in this industry. But if you're asking someone to go into the deep end, you have to hold the hand a little bit. And if you make a mistake, it really should be spotted before it goes on to be problematic.
Yeah, and everything you're talking about there, on a broader scale beyond the cutting room, this comes into project management, team management, leadership. I think what you said, Jasmin, is great, and absolutely people should be able to learn. But I also just want to be honest to the people on the webinar that, the experience you'll have in a cutting room is also going to be dictated by how effective a manager your first is. And if they are not good at doing that, and they feel that the way to manage you is by bullying you or intimidating you because that's what happened to them, or they feel that's an appropriate form of leadership, you're going to have a difficult experience. And probably everyone on this panel has experienced that at some point. And if you talk to other people in the industry, that will be the case too. So, the responsibility of the first is to make sure, and the second to a certain extent, is to be training the trainee and going through stuff with them and showing them workflows. And, this is where the prep period is so important too, because it's the one time of the production where there's the least amount of pressure and gives you as a first or a second the time to actually go through stuff with people and maybe have documentation prepared if you have the time as to how you're doing those workflows. So there's a blueprint for someone to follow in a situation where something needs to be put out the door quickly. And then obviously, as you said, it should get checked as well, because that's another thing that should just always happen, is a junior member's work should always be checked. On the flip side of that, if you're new and you're coming in and you've been given the responsibility, pay attention to what you're being told. Don't let your attention drift. If you've been given the opportunity to do a turnover and you haven't normally done turnovers, even if it's just a practice turnover, really get it right. Like, take your time, check it again, and then be ready to go through it with the first to make sure you've got any mistakes written down as notes, so that you only have to be told once. Because the worst thing and the hardest thing is having to tell someone multiple times the same thing they've been doing correctly, because then for all of us, you can't trust the person to do it anymore, which means you then have to check everything you ask them to do, which then has just doubled your workload. And when everyone's working 10, 11, 12 plus hours, you need to be able to rely on your team to give them the work to do. So it's a two-way relationship, it's absolutely a two-way relationship.
Yeah. And I think you make a great point about the realities of sometimes there's just as a first, there's a lot of pressure on you to get something out the door, and it means that sometimes you're perhaps not giving your trainee as much attention as you would like to,
Right.
especially if you work on a production where they're perhaps not funded as second, they've just gone straight in with a trainee, which they shouldn't do, but they do.
Right.
And it is that sort of thing where as a trainee you've got to kind of, you've got to make sure you're looked after, but then also understands the pressure that kind of everyone around you is under. So you should, you might very well be asked to do things which you might think are too much to ask a trainee, but it might be that thing of like, well, okay, I'll do it, but please can you check it at the end of the day, or whatever it is. It's definitely a kind of real balancing act, and it's certainly an industry of deep ends. At some point in your career you're going to be in at the deep end. So as a trainee, I'd say if that comes up, then take the opportunity to be pushed there, but just don't feel like you have to take ultimate responsibility for what you've done with that. Take responsibility for what you're doing, but in terms of the wider scale of production, don't feel like it's then your fault if you've been asked to do something massive and then no one checks it and it causes problems.
And as a junior member of the team as well, coming in and, you're observing the cutting room, you're seeing things from a junior position, just be mindful of the fact that you're probably really passionate about what you're doing. You're excited about the opportunity you've had. Maybe you've got a break and you're on a feature film. Just remember that everyone above you is probably on 50 to 500 emails a day that you may not be on that relates to their job. So if the first is a little bit short with you, or you don't feel like you're capable of doing stuff, but you haven't had the opportunity to do it, just try and remember that fact, be patient, and know that progressing up the ladder you don't have to rush. Like, you've got your entire life to do this, because editing, essentially, as long as your brain works and your hands work and you can keep up with how a computer works, we're not like footballers. We don't top out at 30. The top editors in this industry are 50, 60, 70 years old, because it's a lifetime of storytelling that they've got in their brains, and you've got your whole opportunity to do that too. And one of the things that's come up a lot on some of the stuff that I've been listening to and researching is the difference between how, just as technology has advanced and gratification has become more instant, that has bled into people's desires to progress in career as well, and so on. It's great. You've got to have enthusiasm and you've got to have drive, but at the same time, I would say that the hierarchical nature of the film industry has not kept pace with that. So if you're in a cutting room and you don't assume you can do one job as a trainee, one job as a second, and then boom, you're ready to be a first assistant on something, because realistically, you just haven't had the opportunity in that time to experience enough different sets of people and films and workflows to be doing that. I mean, there'll be some people obviously who will break that rule and really could do that, but the majority of people, I would say, rightly or wrongly, I think you need time to do it. It's fine to be a second for 4 or 5 films and really just become so solid at that role that you are like the go-to second that everybody wants. Yeah.
And I think when you do then step up, you're much more equipped to step up if you've done it for a bit longer. I did in TV edits of 4 second jobs. I know both the 4th one, I was just like, I'm so ready to step up. I don't want to do this. But then even on that job, the first went away for a couple of weeks to assemble in another country. And then it was suddenly like, I could do all the technical stuff, but then as we've been talking about the politics of it all and dealing with that, and it was like, oh, I've still learned something as a second. And then so by the time I did step up, and it happened to be on a job where I was then in another country, so with far fewer support systems than you might on a UK job, I was so much better equipped. So absolutely, don't feel like you need, I think it's natural to kind of want to be like, I'm going to do this and this and this, and then I'm going to be there within 5 years or whatever. Just take your time and, take the opportunities that come to you, and sort of don't try and rush through the industry. And a lot of people will have a chip on their shoulder about that if you do that as well.
Yeah, you have to remember how that looks to other people who've come through the system in that way, and rightly or wrongly, it will impact how they view you. Maybe it's unfair and they shouldn't do that, but it will. And should we jump onto some specific Q&As, Eleanor? I'm just mindful of the time.
Yes, that's a brilliant idea. I will get the Q&A box open. If anyone else watching the webinar would like to submit a question, submit it in the Q&A box, and I'll have a go through now.
Can I answer a couple of short ones quickly that have been put on there? Someone anonymous asked about code books. Are they ever not in FileMaker? Often no, but they can be. on the films I've worked on, then this amazing guy, Ben Mills, who's a VFX editor and is now becoming a great editor in his own right. He was the keeper of the code book. He was like, you know, this thing of beauty that he built and developed and changed and expanded over the course of 6 or 7 years. And on Kick-Ass 2, I did the code book for that film. He'd moved on to another job, wasn't there as VFX editor anymore. I didn't know FileMaker. I still don't know it beyond the sort of user interaction. I don't know the back end because I always had Ben. So that code book was an Excel file, and there were 60 shoot days, and I had 60 sheets along the bottom, and each one was a shoot day with all the metadata that I'd exported from the Avid bin view. So it can be other formats. I think just the standard is for it to be in FileMaker, and it's just easier as well for them to use it on the other end, because you always have to think about who are the people going to be looking at all of this footage and files who didn't work on the film and work for the studio and have no knowledge of the shoot. Your job is to make it as easy as possible for them to find what they need without necessarily having to go into an Avid project, because that's not always, you know, that's just not always an option depending on the scenario in the studio at the other end. You know, there's a lot of different departments in the studio that are fragmented and don't always talk to each other, and so you have to cater for that. So it can be an Excel spreadsheet. That was taken fine. The other one I just wanted to answer quickly was about, someone asked about what a block was. A block, here we go. Zora Arnold said, what is a block? A block is just a number of episodes in a TV series. So on Pennyworth, block 1 is the first 2 episodes of the show. Block 2 is the next 2 episodes of the show. And guys, you've done more TV than me. Is it always 2 episodes? Can it be more than that?
Sometimes 3, sometimes 1. I mean, when I started out, it was very much like a block is 2 episodes, and each block will have an editor and it will have a director. And that was how it worked. Again, the industry sort of mutating and changing. It gets a bit messier sometimes to make schedules work and stuff. You have sort of, 1 episode in one block and then 3 in the next one, and it's all to do with people's availability. Directors specifically. I mean, really, a block is defined by a number of episodes that are shot together and by the same director. Again, it can sort of vary, but the simple way to kind of learn it when you're starting out is, if you have an 8 episode series, the chances are episodes 1 and 2 are block 1, 3 and 4 block 2, etc., and each of those blocks will have an editor and it will have a director.
We've had a question. We spoke about how we've had different contacts in the industry and then getting your next job through those contacts. And we've had a question saying, would you say all your work comes from contacts and networking, or also from applying for advertised jobs? Do you think there's much worth searching and applying, or is it better to directly contact editors and post supervisors?
Good question.
So, in terms of factual, I would say that there's the talent manager, I think it's called, which is fairly good. I got 1 job through that then resulted in more work through the same people, and then also there's a number of Facebook groups where people post jobs that I find a mixed bag, but I've got work through them before, worth chasing there. But I tend to find once a few people know who you are, you tend to get people calling you just because of what you've done already.
Yeah, it's all about those first few jobs. I mean, the first several years of my assisting career, everything I got was through people I met as a runner, by just being enthusiastic and say, this is where I want to end up. I really enjoy drama. I really want to, eventually edit it, but for now I want to assist. I guess, I talked a bit about Fortitude, and that, I'd been a runner at that post facility, and so my CV went to the top because they knew me. And then I worked on Broadchurch, and that job I got actually through my boss when I was a runner, because he obviously talks to all the clients there, and they were looking for a second, and he recommended me. Then I worked on Humans, and again, I've got that through an assistant who I'd met as a runner. So you can kind of see the pattern there. And by the time you've done that many jobs, you then worked with quite a few editors and quite a few assistants. And as Toby said, you then sort of start to get the call, or you certainly have like an address book of people who you can start emailing when you become free. So yeah, it's all about those kind of first few contacts. And you know, as much as none of us here are here because they want to make tea and coffee, I really recommend running for at least a few months. It's a very kind of useful thing to do.
And you get to see the inside of a post house and kind of how they work and what the atmosphere is like, what the people
Absolutely.
are like. And obviously every post house is different, but you can sort of, I think, work out whether it's somewhere you want to be, maybe as an online editor, if you're more technically minded and you just like computing and that kind of side of things. Or maybe you see what a grader does and suddenly you're like, whoa, I work in Lightroom and do all this kind of stuff with my still images. And this is what it is. And the Resolve or the base light for feature film grading that could turn you into a passion that you've never had. So seeing everything, even for a little bit, is good. But I think try and always have a plan and know when to move on. If you can. I know that's a lot easier to do than to say. Film, to just be specific to the question, I would hope that people now would say that it's easier to get into the industry than it has been. I feel like it's changed in the last few years, just from seeing and observing and talking to people, mainly because we're building more of a community. Like, I think everyone is actively trying to do more with that across all formats and all age groups and all generations as well. And certainly that's true for post. I hope it's true with the other departments as well. But it is still very much about who you know, and someone will probably recommend you, or, you know, first assistants are sharing CVs all the time and passing information on and talking to each other. And if I see that someone's worked with someone I know on a different show, then I'll check in with them and say, you know, how were they? What were their skills like? How were they good communicators? You know, asking all the questions about all the things that I would do. In terms of getting the job, you know, you have to play the volume game. You have to just get in touch with as many people as possible, as possible. And, you know, don't be offended as well if you don't hear back from people, and or if they take a long time to respond. Like, people's jobs are very stressful just due to all the stuff we've talked about tonight. And often when people finish a job, they go on holiday, or they just disappear, you know, and then take time off, or they spend time with friends, family, loved ones, whatever. So answering emails is not always the priority. That's why you have to A, play the volume game and contact as many people as possible, and B, just gently follow up, you know, every few weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, like check in, see if someone responded. Like, some people just won't respond. Some people will be great and apologize. Some people, you know, will reply immediately. Everyone's different. Everyone's life is different. Their circumstances are different at that time. So don't be disheartened if it takes time. You know, I've come across people who have literally got a job immediately based on the first contact they made because they just happened to reach out to someone at the time that they were looking for a trainee on a film, and they happened to be available and have a car and could drive to the studios, and they just fit, you know, the thing that was needed. And then other people have taken years to break in, but they did eventually get their break. But if you can afford it and you can do it, giving up is what will stop you getting somewhere. I know that's a very cliche thing to say, and we hear it a lot, but it is essentially true. It's cliche for a reason.
We've had another question asking, how did you get your first jobs as post-production runners in production houses in the first place?
I have to be honest and say I kind of got I had to interview, but I kind of got the contacts through my employability department at my university. I'd done all the background research. I'd kind of worked out kind of which post houses worked on the sort of content that I wanted to kind of end up on. But there was a lot of them didn't have any contact details, and I do appreciate that that's really, really tricky if you're trying to break in, and certainly the industry has massive issues with kind of that sort of entry level. But, you know, I got in contact with my employability department, and they knew someone at particular facilities I wanted to interview for. And so then I got those details, and then I got an interview, and, you know, I interviewed for a few jobs and got one of them. If you don't, I mean, that's not to say you have to go to university for 3 years to be a runner. But, you know, just look, you know, kind of Google post houses that kind of do the sort of content you want to work on, and just, as Riccardo was saying, you know, kind of volume, keep applying, because they'll have, you know, runners, there's a massive turnover of runners. You might email one time and they've got what they need. They're not hiring. You might email another time and 3 people have just been promoted in kind of various different ways in different parts of the industry. So you can just sort of pop in. But yeah, just it's not necessarily right, but it's a keep going, and it's a it's not always fair. Sometimes people who have, you know, got friends and family already in the industry get that head start, and it's not fair, and we need to deal with it. But unfortunately, that's the sort of reality at the moment.
Just in factual, I'd say it can be different. So I was never a post runner. My first job was with Maverick TV, as I said, and I'd done some work placements with them whilst at university. So I had that relationship there, but I joined as technical assistant was the role, and it was part sort of edit assistant because they had some in-house edit. They had about 7 edit suites, an online suite and a mixing suite as well. But also I was dealing with camera kit and so on for the productions that were going on. So it was a mixture of both. And I think actually there's a lot of indies, especially the larger ones, that they have their own in-house edits, and they will take people on who, you know, are fairly junior in a junior role that they can then train up. And sometimes it does. I mean, I had some runner responsibilities. I did have to keep the tea and coffee flowing in the edit suites as well as the rushes, but it wasn't the main bit of my job. It wasn't a runner role, and they exist in a fair amount of indies. In fact, actually, I think there's a move currently-ish. There's a move for a lot of indies getting their own post facilities, only in small stuff, so they don't have as much as a post house, obviously. But so it's worth going to some of the indies if there's a particular, you know, types of factual programs that you like, find out who makes them and get in contact with them, because often that's quite a good way in. Is also, I know someone, their route in was they worked as a logger on some factual program where effectively all they're doing is watching through the rushes and typing up what happens at all the time codes. And again, it's a very sort of menial, mundane task, but it gets you on an Avid. I mean, you're not doing a huge amount with it, but it introduces you to it. And he started as a logger on the show, like I said, and then came back as an assistant on the show. So for factual, yeah, the indies are quite a good way to get in.
What would be the best way that isn't behind a paywall to start to gather some of the technical skills that are needed to become an edit assistant?
YouTube. Loads of YouTube tutorials, and is it called Avid Free? The kind of free version of Avid.
It's called Media Composer First.
Media Composer First. Which is
download it.
Yeah, it's Avid, but slightly limited, but it has pretty much all the buttons you'd need, and you can learn using tutorials online.
This links into Stephen Cummings' question: is everyone using Avid, or is it other edit software? It depends on the part of the industry you want to go into. Avid is pretty much exclusively used for feature films and for high-end TV. Anything that requires multiple people to be working on the same footage and the same project at the same time, because they basically were the first company, I believe, in the late 80s, early 90s to come up with a patented shared storage system so that multiple people can access just one copy of the media and the project on, well, I think back then it was called, I have no idea what it was called in the early 90s. I came in when it was called a Unity, then it became an ISIS, and then they changed the name for obvious reasons. And then it became a Nexus, which is what it's on now. And a lot of universities that have Avid will have a Nexus in-house, and you'll be working off those if you've been learning Avid that way. If that's what you want to work in, yeah, you need to know it. Feature films are cut on other stuff. You know, Deadpool was cut on Premiere. Focus, the film with Will Smith and Marlo Robbie from 2015, that was cut on FCPX, actually. So it does happen, but it's not the norm. And all of them have strengths and weaknesses. There's a lot about Avid that I love, and there's a lot about Avid that I really don't like. But as far as I'm aware, none of the other companies have really come up with something that matches the Nexus concept and the single project, and the fact that a bin is a single file as opposed to a project, which is a single file, and then that can balloon in size. I don't want this to start becoming an NLE, like who's better conversation, because everyone has their own perspective on this, but Avid is what's used. So if you're not learning it at your university and that's what you want to get into, my recommendation would be, if you have a month free, maybe now is a good time. Get the trial of the full version of Media Composer from the website. You can download for 30 days, and then sign up to the free trial I think you can get a month now of LinkedIn Premium. And then LinkedIn Premium gives you access to the entire catalog of Lynda training courses, because they bought Lynda and it became LinkedIn Learning. And there's a lot of really great, literally like step by step, this is how you open a project, this is how you import media, this is how the Avid Media Files folder structure works. Like you can literally, there's a great one by a guy called Maxim Django, I think, who does that. I watch it just to check in if is there anything that I'm forgetting about, you know, because if you don't do it, you forget it. But if you've never done it before, just put that month aside, tell your friends you're not going to see them much, and you know, watch those videos and learn how the software works. And it comes with footage. It's free footage from Edit Stock, which is another great website where you can download footage from TV, short films, independent films, and actually you can practice being an assistant with this footage. You can download it pre-sunk, so it's ready to edit if you want to practice your editing skills. You can download it unsunk, if that's a term, so that you can practice syncing the footage and combining the audio and sound together manually or with the time code, which is JamSync time code, which you'll learn about. So there's a lot you can do now to prepare yourself, and you can do that for free for a month through just those two platforms. And, you know, at the same time, you can be learning about After Effects if you're interested in VFX editing or VFX assistant editing. Like, the resources are out there. You know, it's not hard to, I would say it's not hard to find them now with a Google and a bit of interest.
Also, go on, Naomi.
Sorry, I was just going to say, the other thing is just sort of use them. I mean, absolutely use the tutorials, but I don't know, everyone learns differently. Some people learn by being, you know, looking at a video and it says, do this and do this.
Right.
I learn by sort of doing it and then doing it wrong and then work out why I did it wrong, because then you really have to go into the back room, because it's not like you press this button, then you press this button. It's like, oh, but if I do that, that links to the media that's in that file over there. Oh, now I understand. If I do this again, I have to do it like this, so that when I come in at the end, I don't have problems. So that, I mean, I do, you know, so I just also say absolutely whatever tutorials you can find, go for them, but also just try and cut something, but, you know, sync the rushes, use proxies, and then bring them back at the end, because there's nothing like kind of a project where you can mess up with no consequences to really learn.
Yeah.
What were you going to come in on, Jasmin? I'm not sure if Eleanor's frozen or not. So, Jasmin, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. There's just a couple of courses that I found online. I haven't done them, but I can't vouch for them. But there's one called Assistant Editors Bootcamp, and I think they've got a free course for like assistant editing for reality TV. And there's also one called Cause and FX. It's an Avid Assistant Foundation course. So those might be worth checking out as well as, you know, using Avid and practicing on that.
Yes.
To come in.
There's
on
also just to follow up from Jasmin.
Right.
There's also one called Master the Workflow, which is also similar to the Assistant Editors Bootcamp. Some of these do cost, so, you know, it's worth taking a look at, putting some money aside, saving some stuff, or emailing them, see if you can get a discount, or a like junior or a student or whatever. Like, you know, always ask, because if you don't ask, you don't get. But those courses are prepared and created by people who work in the industry and have practical real world experience of what you need to do. So they're definitely worth looking at. Toby?
Just to go back to the sort of Avid versus Premiere versus FCPX, to echo what those guys are saying, yes, Avid is the most used thing in factual TV, but actually only to sort of 70–80%. I saw a statistic last year. There's a fair amount of sort of journalistic type stuff that's done on Premiere, and a lot of sort of news type things is done on Premiere or Final Cut. I believe I say recently, but time is a different thing these days. I saw a job advertised for doing VT inserts for the One Show that was Premiere based. So there is more Premiere and slightly Final Cut editing in factual world, but really Avid is the main thing.
And a lot of professional, like short form and corporate stuff is done on Premiere too. I know a lot of people that I've spoken to who have done that.
Some of it Final Cut X as well. Yeah,
it's becoming more prominent now, isn't it, as well, with so many of the decent plugins that are coming for it to make it more and more professional. I think Kat on the committee, right, Eleanor, she works in short form and advertising, and they do a lot of stuff in Premiere as well. So it really depends on what you want to get into, what field you want to get into. You know, do your research, find out what they use, and then focus your learning onto that.
And definitely have a look at the Rough Assembly YouTube channel. Aideen Johnston did a great webinar on assistant editing for beginners, and Kat did one on Premiere short form workflows. So definitely have a look on there as well. I had a question asking, when would be a good time to start sending cold CVs, as most production companies has been paused by COVID? If they start filming in July or August, is now too early to send CVs to post houses?
Silence.
Tricky, yeah.
I think it's kind of a bit of an unknown at the moment because the wider situation is unknown. Where TV is so at the mercy of the wider situation, not because of what we do in post-production, because a lot of that can be facilitated to work slightly differently with social distancing and working from home. Just because, I mean, certainly in TV drama, the big problem they have is insurance. So even though technically they might be allowed to shoot, the insurance won't cover them. So if someone breaks their leg, it's like an actor breaks a leg and they have to down tools and they have to pay all the crew for 2 weeks to not do anything, the insurance company will cover that. If someone gets COVID and the whole crew have to self-isolate and the production company still have to pay them, the insurance company won't cover that. So, I mean, in terms of short form stuff, in terms of factual, I don't quite know, maybe it's a bit different, but certainly in drama, I know that that's the problem we're having. Having said that, I don't know if there's ever a bad time to send your CV and to get on someone's radar. It might be then, as Ricardo was discussing earlier, about sending a follow-up in a few weeks. But certainly, you know, if you've got time now because you're locked down, there's nothing wrong with sort of honing your CV and just kind of asking some questions and seeing who's out there.
I think getting in touch with post houses now is trickier than with freelancers. I don't know, I feel like I'm trying to cast my mind back to when I was doing the same process and trying to apply it to a certain extent to this situation now. I think maybe post houses' priority right now is not going to be hiring runners and such unless they're absolutely needed. It's going to be keeping the lights on and the work going, as you were saying. I think maybe now is a good opportunity to be contacting assistant editors, features assistant editors, TV assistant editors in the world that you're interested in getting into, trying to establish some communication with them, just so you're on their radar. So much of this is about just being on their radar and just being in the background, and then they may think of you, or hopefully will think of you when something comes up. And maybe you can get to know them a little bit and have a Zoom call with them the way we're talking now. Normally the coffee thing is divisive. Some people like it, some people don't. I think personally it's only fair to give someone an opportunity to meet them in person, because you don't know what they're like until you've met them and spoken to them and quizzed them about things, and given them the opportunity to ask you as well. So maybe you can digitally replicate that. But in terms of post houses, I guess I honestly, it's a terrible answer. I really don't know whether now is a good time to be contacting them. Again, just play the numbers game, right, Toby? You just got to email them and just be like, see who responds.
Yeah. Exactly. The thing about post houses, from what I know from them, is that they're getting CVs all the time, and for all the sort of jobs, from runners up to their online editors. And basically, when a job comes up, they'll look in-house and see if they can hire, promote someone up, and then they'll just go to the most recent batch of CVs almost, and just go, well, who have we heard from recently? So yeah. It really is just, it's a numbers thing.
That's why the repeat thing is really important, because if you don't keep repeating it, you never might not end up on top of the pile to just be the person that they come across at that moment. It's not a good hiring system, but unfortunately, it's just the reality of working long days and being stressed and having to hire quickly or suddenly because a decision changes things up. And this person's great, let's get them in, have a chat with them.
The other thing I'd say is that a lot of post houses, and then also indies, I guess, you'd have to do a bit more research, but a lot of post houses have on their website who is like the head of, or who's the person that hires runners, or who's the person in charge of the offline assistants and so on. So rather than just spending a speculative email to jobs@posthouse.com, send it to that person if you can find their email address, because they'll hear that, they'll notice that one more than just going to that inbox and going, oh my God, there's hundreds, just take that 20 and have a look. So yeah, again, do research. What it's all about.
We had a question asking, what is the difference between duties as a first assistant and a second assistant?
Sometimes they can be almost identical. the difference is where the ultimate responsibility lies and where the ultimate management of the cutting room lies. But certainly, like, an experienced second assistant will definitely be expected to do things like turnovers, sinking rushes, all of the kind of technical things that the first assistant's doing. The first assistant is more likely, or is certainly going to get first dibs on things like getting to cut recaps and promos. That's going to go to the first assistant first. Some of them aren't interested in that, or some of them have done enough of those things or are too busy, and you might then as a second get a chance to do that. But I think, a second assistant is really a first assistant in training. Like, once you've done it a few times, the technical side is really similar. But as I was saying about kind of my experiences, a first assistant is kind of ultimately responsible for, in terms of the backroom cutting room, managing the kind of people side of it. The jobs are more likely to come through them first and be divvied out. They're more likely to be on the phone to a producer or a director. But again, it's TV. It can vary from job to job, and if you're a second and you very quickly establish yourself as someone who's reliable, then and a producer or an editor knows that the first assistant is just swamped, they might come straight to you. But yeah, I think the biggest difference is in management, and responsibility. Ultimately, the first assistant is kind of responsible for the backroom side of the cutting room. But it's, in terms of technical side, it can be very similar indeed.
Is it
Have you
similar?
found the same? Oh, go on, sorry, Eleanor.
Is it similar in the way that the duties are differentiated in TV drama? Is that similar in feature films?
I think it depends on the editor and, again, how they want to run their cutting room. I can speak primarily from working with Eddie, because obviously that's my experience, and because he's such a fast editor, he's so capable, he's technical himself, then we as the assistants were very much responsible for the smooth running of the cutting room and the workflow, and being like the really strong skeleton infrastructure underneath him and his director working together. So, obviously he would be in the room with Matthew Vaughn working on Kingsman films, or he'd be in with Chris McQuarrie, I shouldn't call him McHugh, I don't know him that well, doing the Mission Impossible stuff, and they would be very much focused on, story and creativity. And then the jobs that would come out to us they were creative in a certain way. What would normally happen was, the work would come to me and Tom, we'd delegate out, mainly because, again, it's the machine system. Everyone ends up doing certain things because there's just so much to do, because on the big features, you've got turnovers and you've got marketing and you've got trailers and you've got reels delivering to the DI, and you've got the composers working away, and you've got the sound team working away. So because they can afford to pay for everyone to be working at the same time, it dictates how much work there is and the workflow. Smaller films, independent and more linear, so an assistant might have more time to creatively assist. It doesn't matter whether they're first or second, they might have the time to do that because the workflow is more linear. So as a first, what ended up happening was we sort of cordoned off work to each other. Once the DI started on Mission Impossible, we turned the whole movie over to the DI, I think 3, maybe 4 times in total, because of the workflow and the time it took for that to happen, and the constant updates and the need to rebalance the reels and so on and so on. So I sort of took responsibility for that. Tom would be dealing with turnovers to all the different departments. He'd ask me to do some when needed, and he'd also ask the seconds to do that. The seconds were also helping the VFX team with in-house comps and stuff in the Avid and in After Effects and so on, because there was so many shots where things needed to be done, and often, prepping for a screening, it's all hands on deck. Everyone's just helping out with all that stuff as well. Hannah was a great trainee on that film, very capable trainee, not just in the Avid as well. Not just in the Avid, but After Effects as well. So we could give her work to do as well. So it really depends on the abilities of the team and the way the firsts want to do it. But me and Tom very much took point on delegating out the work, and the rest of the team was there to support us in what we needed to do and how we needed to do it. And it was primarily me and Tom as the first who were talking to Susan, who was the post supervisor. We would meet daily and talk and have a meeting about what needed to happen, and she would be filling us on stuff that was coming in from the States overnight. From my memory, the seconds and the trainee weren't doing that so much. They were there to help the VFX editor and the VFX team, and to take on any work that me and Tom needed to give out. A lot of mine and Tom's jobs is emailing as well. So a lot of the work often is quite fun and looks quite cool, but we don't have the time to sit there on the Avid and do it. So we will hand that off so that we can be responding to many email chains that everyone is on, and also many email chains that not everyone is on, to just, the nature of the beast. So that was, again, a slightly all over the place, but hopefully it kind of depicts the differences between the first. You are a manager, you're managing the team, so 50% of your job is management and delegation, and you jump in and do bits when you can. I did a little creative thing for the Kingsman, the Golden Circle, where there's a briefcase that opens and there needed to be a graphic showing that the antidote was released, and I was like, oh great, I can do this. And it's like, yes, I can do something creative. Even though it was a very simple thing, the fact that I got to do that was fun, because so much had not been that kind of work before and after. So what's it like in TP for you, Jasmin, compared to Naomi? Do you find the same with first and second?
Well, actually, I worked with Naomi on a job where she was the first and I was the second, and a lot of the time we shared the workload. And then most recently, we worked together on a job where we were both first assistants, and again, we were sharing the workload. So I think the line does blur a lot of the time. But yeah, like everyone's saying, it's exactly the same. The first is, management of the cutting room, but technically, syncing rushes, you'll probably share the workload if there's a lot to do. And exporting cuts and things, you kind of share those roles. So, yeah. What
was it like? What was the difference for you guys when you were working as a second to Naomi, and then you were working as first? Like, did the communication styles change? Were you sharing a room and talking? Like, how did you break down the work and share it out?
We were sharing rooms both times in the same post house, just in down the corridor, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And it was just the same dynamic. It was like we both, helped each other out. We both respected each other. We had a really good working relationship, and it was almost like almost the roles didn't matter in a sense, because we were just working as a team. It was, us against the rushes or us against supporting the cuts kind of thing. So yeah.
Like a fluid entity.
Yeah.
Well, that is what it needs to be like, right? That is how you get it done at the end of the day. Eleanor, should we look at that one that came first in about...
Yeah, so we've had a question saying, what can actively be done to compel those with actual hiring power to actually give non-white BAME candidates a chance in post-production?
Can I come in on this, if it's possible?
Yeah.
I think that we've kind of been through this cycle before, haven't we? In terms of, like the person who just put that in, like there's always been initiatives. There's been Project Diamond, which the BBC launched, and BECTU ended up actually having to boycott it because we didn't feel that the way in which they weren't releasing their true findings, deplorable. I think in that sense there has to be real change from the top, and there has to be a real new and refreshed means and ways of also challenging gatekeepers, because I think whilst people get to specific points in their careers, and as you say, it's not an age thing here, like Riccardo, you said it's not like you're a footballer or something, but actually there are issues that we come up against time and time again, and it's related back to class. It's related back to, where you're from, whether you've been born in London or not. It's to do with like what kind of economical area you come from. And it's also to do with the fact that we don't have things such as rent control in London. There's also the duality issue of the fact that we, are in an industry where people are asked to work for free or very little money. And that means that, people who can turn to their parents or turn to any other kind of support network that they may have in a financial way, inevitably gives those people a head start. I think we need to stop thinking about initiatives and actually do something to change. And you know, you're all in positions to, you know, especially if you're comfortable in your careers, then you will inevitably have people that you know who run post houses, people who you know who work at skill set, people who you know that, you know, work in the studios and run the post houses in the studios. And if you see that, you know, your team doesn't have diversity in it, then you call it out, because it's, you know, it's not on, like, it can't carry on like this, you know, perpetual cycle of non-diversity, or people coming in. You know, it's the same for women. The amount of women that go to art school is 80%, and then the amount of women who become successful artists, in inverted commas, then drops down to 20%. So, you know, there's kind of outsider influences going on, but there needs to be meaningful changes and meaningful initiatives, and for those initiatives to be called out by platforms such as BECTU, but also everyone else in the industry as well, if they're not actually if they're not actually transferring anything meaningful in terms of who we have as editors in the industry.
And people actually need to want to change as well. I think that's the key thing. Like, it's easy for an initiative to spring up and someone to say something, and then, like you said, nothing change. I remember listening to the BAFTA speech that Lenny Henry did, the annual lecture, a couple of years ago or a few years ago, and he just called everyone to task basically on it. And he was just saying, like, this is all the initiatives that were made in the last year, and these are the statistics. And it was a marginal improvement of a few percent, but essentially the situation hadn't really changed. And, you know, on the BAFTA stage, he called people out on it. And I remember listening to that and going, oh, that's a really depressing statistic. And I think the other thing we just need to accept, I hope this comes across the way I mean it, but like, I'm sitting here as a white guy and I'm going, I genuinely didn't fully understand the issue. And I think we need to be saying that and like be okay to say that and go, we need to educate ourselves more about this stuff and read more and listen to podcasts more and just learn what it's like to not be like essentially a white male in a privileged position, because it does put a blinker on to the process. And I'm learning more about this as we go.
Yeah, and also learning means and ways to which you can become an ally in the way that people want you to be an ally, you know. All that information is out there. There's no such thing as a stupid question. You know, I think we're entering into a new kind of stage of language around BAME issues, around LGBTQI issues. You know, we have a huge issue with TERFism, which is also completely apparent in the industry, and there's a lot of work to be done. That would be our position anyway on the matter. But I don't know if anyone else has any kind of tips for the person that we have on the call. I know that Kat Janes, who Eleanor actually mentioned earlier, they run Edit Collective, which is an agency for short form editors, and they are hopefully developing a mentoring scheme which is for like junior level BAME people who are in the editing industry. You know, because the thing is, we also can't wait for the people at the top to do it. You know, there's means and ways in which we can kind of work on things on the ground, and if we can embrace those suggestions and work, then I think that's a good place to start, really.
The guys opening in the post-sound section of our branch are doing something similar. It's yet to be launched. They're working on finding people who will help mentor, but I know that they are planning on doing something very similar to what Kat's got in mind. And also, we have just started a diversity survey, which again isn't an action to do anything, but it is an action to show us the diversity that does exist in our industry, or doesn't, but depending on how, you know, what results we get back from that. So I think, you know, we're doing things, we're taking steps, but yeah, we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, and I think for me, part of the problem, and we can all be part of the solution, is TV's insistence on trying to take on people who are already trained all the time. Because when you do that, then your industry will reflect the wider inequalities of the country, because you're taking on people. For example, there is so many people go straight out of the National Film and Television School, which is fantastic but really expensive, and you already have to have a ton of experience in filmmaking to even get in, and they're the people that then jump into head of department roles, whereas the rest of us are kind of left to kind of go in, try and go in through the bottom. And I think we've got to, all of us, when we're hiring at whatever level, be prepared to take on people from all sorts of backgrounds who might not necessarily have had the advantage of training and access to expensive kit that other people may have done.
Right.
One of the most amazing thing about Zoom is we were talking to an actor about it the other day, is that they can now just send a video of themselves, or they can meet over Zoom, and so that's saving on average between 100 and 250 pounds on a return ticket to London. Actually, how do we also embrace technology in terms of how people get into the industry and get chosen for work? Because there are means to get to a place where actually, if you take travel out, maybe there's an argument that will open it up in an organic way as well. So we've heard from Eleanor, I think is still frozen. Jasmin, do you have a point on that?
No, I just wanted to add that I think PACT have an indie diversity training scheme, and also Media Trust have a brilliant mentoring scheme as well. So those are two really useful avenues.
Yeah.
To take a look at.
Right. If you guys have any links, by the way, would you just be mindful of putting them in the chat for everyone, in the chat function? That would be really great. Eleanor, are you back, or do you want me to quickly run through the rest of these questions? Because you keep on freezing.
Oh, sorry. I am back. We've had a question saying, does age come into play when breaking into the film and TV industry? I'm 32 and graduated with a degree in film a few years ago. I went off travelling to explore more and feel I have delayed my prospects.
Okay, I think Eleanor's gone again.
No, I think she's still there.
Is she?
Sorry, would you like to repeat the question?
I don't think we were sure who you were addressing it to. That's all. We just needed. No one sort of answered because we weren't sure who you wanted to go first.
Riccardo.
Okay.
A barrier.
I think yes and no, depending on, again, the situation. It's one of those things where it depends. If in your head it's a barrier, then it's playing a role as a barrier. If you feel that it's not an issue for yourself, then that's one stage that you've just conquered in terms of how you're projecting yourself in interviews and when you meet people to talk about it as well. Practical example is on X-Men, then I was the trainee, and the PA, the post PA, then he was, I think, 32, and he'd never used the Avid before, and he was in the cutting room. I think he'd actually sort of transitioned sideways from a different role, had taken the initiative to go and try and meet people in the editing department, and had managed to get in at the entry level post PA position. But he was fine with that because it was an opportunity to come in and learn. And he was, at that point, it was still DVD dailies, so he was taking the DVD dailies around to the different departments. He was organizing the paperwork, but by the end of the film, he'd learned a lot about the Avid. His name's Jez. He's a great guy. And, he went on then to move up the assistant editing ranks as well, and is doing really well in films himself. So that's an example of how it can work. I think there are people who do have prejudices against the idea of a person, say, over a certain age working as a PA or as a trainee or as an assistant. But hopefully that's something that we can stamp out and keep working on, because age shouldn't matter as long as you can do the job, or as long as you're keen to learn and are willing to learn and can show that you're capable, then age shouldn't matter. But obviously, yeah, it's not as simple as that. Persistence, again, I think is the key there. And then, again, as we just talked about, it's on all of us to not be prejudiced against someone based on their age.
We've had a question from Oliver saying, hi, I'm currently working at a post house as a junior offline edit assistant. Do you have any advice in terms of moving on from there and what skills I can transfer from my current position to something such as drama? Naomi, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of moving, you're doing a great thing in terms of you'll be learning some great technical skills, and any understandings you've built of just how TV works in a very technical sense. Whatever you're doing in terms of transcoding, managing avids, all of that stuff that's going to be so helpful when you step into assistant editing. I think in terms of making the jump, it's going to be about people now. I don't know how your post facility works, but we're not, if it's post facility that also then hires out kind of avid suites to kind of freelance editors, in which case just sort of try and sort of be around when they've nipped out for coffee or something, and just sort of try and get chatty with them. If not, I mean, I'm a big screen skills advocate. So many brilliant people have come through that. Try and get on that scheme when it next opens up. And yeah, I mean, I sort of, I was what's called a tech op at my post facility, but it was basically an edit assistant. And I got it through a mixture of screen skills and then having been friendly with the clients at the post facility.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on that question?
I mean, when I went from being edit assistant to assistant editor, I went and found the assistant editors on the sorts of programs that were in my post facility and sort of asked them how they got to where they are, and could they give me any advice and contacts and so on. And one of those specifically led to my first freelance role, because he put me in contact with the people that were hiring for like the next series of 999. And that's how I did it. So I'd say, especially if you want to get into drama, go and find the first and second assistants that are around your facility and get speaking to them, because they're the people that will hire you as a trainee or what have you. So yeah, go speak to them.
We had a question on what is your lifestyle like in the industry. We have many stories of working very long hours. So what is your lifestyle like as an assistant, Naomi?
Okay, so when I was starting out as an assistant, I'm just gonna be honest and say I overdid it, and I let people take advantage way too much. I was in the cutting room crazy hours most days, and it took a real toll. And it not only that, it caused a sort of bitterness. I wanted to get into this industry for a long time, and then suddenly I just didn't like my job, and I thought about quitting several times. But I think it's a combination of me maturing, and also I think BECTU, especially in the last few years, have been kind of played a big part in trying to kind of change things for us. So I'd say now it's a case of balance. There are still long days and there are still really busy days, but you try and balance those out. So I mean, I work with a great editor who's all about that balance. So during the shoot, he's great. A lot of the time he's self-sufficient, and if I'm kind of done with the rushes and he doesn't need anything, he'll just be like, go home, because during the fine cut I'm probably going to need you for a lot more hours. So it's a game of balance, really, and it's a game of you want to be helpful, and there are times where you're going to want to go the extra mile, and there are times where you're going to need to go the extra mile, and it's a case of balancing that out with other times where you sort of go, actually, there's this can wait till tomorrow, double check it can, but just sort of kind of just put in a check on it. I mean, I worked on a brilliant drama called Chimerica, but it was the scale and complexity of it was like nothing I'd ever worked on before, just the sheer amount to do. And there was for the shoot there was just me, and then for the fine cut there was me and a trainee, and it just quite frankly wasn't enough. So at one point I was just like, I was in the middle of a job, and I was like, I'm booking a holiday, I'm going away from a week, and when I came back, there's nothing like leaving for a week for people to realize how much you're doing. So when I came back, a lot changed. It was still busy and there were still horrendous amounts to do, but the way people were asking for things very quickly changed, and the way things were managed. So yeah, it's job dependent, it's personality dependent, but certainly it's something that BECTU are working really hard on and trying to improve. And it's a case of sometimes accepting that creative industries are long hours, and sometimes taking a stand and going, actually, there's nothing left. You just need to give me a little bit of space.
I'd say if you're having to work late every day or most days, then either they're asking too much, the production are asking too much of you, or and they need to hire someone else, or they need to change the way they're going about what they're going about. It's more often than not your fault or your problem. In fact, it's the experience I've had in factual, definitely, because again, the money thing is you're overworked because they're skimping on money. And as an assistant, you're already one of the lower paid people there. So quite frankly, they should get another one of you or change what they're doing. But
yeah, never be afraid to ask for another assistant.
But hopefully that's because you want to.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say the days I do longer hours now, it's because I've had an opportunity to kind of cut something or do something a little bit extra. So I've sort of done my job, you know, kind of in the main hours of the day, and then I've stayed later because I want to kind of get on with that creative thing. Whereas you're absolutely right. If you've been asked to turn over 3 episodes in 3 days, and it's, you know, a really big complicated drama, you can say, well, either it's going to take me a week and a half, or we need someone else on board. You know, I can't be here 14 hours for 3 days to do that.
I worked on a trainee job, and I was syncing rushes at like 7 in the morning, and I was like, is this what it's going to be like as an assistant when I finally level up, and am I going to be in at 7 a.m. syncing rushes? But what I think, and that hasn't happened since, but what I think is gaining momentum is kind of, you know, the idea of like share my telly job, is that you're on a lot of jobs you might have like 2 first assistants on, in which case you can kind of like split the shifts a little bit, so you can have, or stagger it at least. So again, on a job that me and Naomi worked on, I would be in early at like 8:30, and I would work on rushes because I'm the first one in, and then Naomi would come in around 10, was it? Were you coming in at like 10 a little bit? And then I was leaving a little bit earlier, and then Naomi was saying a little bit later, like just to stick around in case the editors needed anything, or if a cut needed to go out. So yeah, it's dependent on the production, and, you know, whether you've got trainees or whether you've got 2 first assistants, or yeah.
Riccardo, what is the lifestyle like in features?
My experience has been that it is quite intense. Again, I think it can depend. As I always say, everything depends on the film, the schedule of the film, how long they've got to make it. You know, how many editors you're working for, how complicated their reels are, and how they approach filmmaking. You know, the footage. There's and also when you're a junior member, how good your first is, how good they are at managing the workload, respecting you, and the fact that you're in a lower paid job and your time. I think, I'm not going to lie, most of my film career, I've done probably a minimum of 12 hours a day, and often longer. I think that, again, that has changed in the last few years. Certainly, as soon as I became a first, I tried my best to create a system where that wasn't the case for people on a daily basis. There were times where you couldn't avoid it because, you know, in an ideal world, I'd have enough assistants in my cutting room that no one would work more than 8 hours, and we'd spread the work across the day, and everyone would do an 8. I mean, on set, I get it. Like, you know, if you're on a location, you only have 3 days, you have to do the time and the overtime to get the footage, because maybe you just can't afford to go back there, or it's just not physically possible scheduling wise because the location is needed for something else. That makes sense. Cutting rooms, I do feel they're different after having done this for 10 years. Like, I don't think there's any reason that, apart from maybe screenings and stuff, there should ever be a need to do overtime, actually, because you can take the money that you spend on people in overtime and you can put it into extra people at the beginning. But unfortunately, that's not how cutting rooms are viewed. And as of yet, we have been unable to convince people putting the budgets together that is the best way to do it, often because we're brought on as firsts, maybe a few days before, a week before if we're lucky, sometimes literally on day 1 of shoot. So you don't get that time to actually have a communication and a discussion about shifts, work, patterns, life, how many people do we need, and so on. And you know, often there is a little bit of a division between the people doing the hiring and putting the budgets together and the people actually in the trenches doing the job in terms of what we need to do and the hours that it takes to do it and the intricacies of just working with the footage and the software and the computers and the number of computers, how long things take, the export, you know, and so on and so on and so on. So the hours are long, but they're getting better. And if you've got a good first, hopefully, you know, they'll schedule in a way that at the moment, I'd hope no one has to do more than 10 hours, but it is detrimental and it can impact your life. It can impact your relationship, especially if you have someone who is not in the industry. I think that can make it really hard. And there's a lot of stories I've heard from people in public on panels and talking individually with people, you know, where they've gone through some really tough times, really hard times, just because the industry and the film demands so much from you. Because there is this thing about film, right? It's like, oh, this film, it has to exist for a reason. It's this work of art. It's like, we can all take a break once we're done, you know? And like, I think there's this unwritten thing in film as well, which is like, hey, we're paying you above average. You know, we're paying you a really good salary. Like, kind of, can you give your all for this project? And then, no, it's not ever said, but there's maybe a little bit of that pressure. And I think maybe it's I don't know, it comes from somewhere. And I feel like that comes and goes and is changing as well. But I think we don't need to work more than 8 to 10 hours. And, you know, I will be happy if I finish my career as a doddering old 70-year-old man or whatever, hopefully older than 70. And I can say and talk to people and we all are like going, we didn't do more than 8 hours a day. And there were enough people to do the work. And maybe on screenings, you know, or big moments, we pulled together and people did more. But we're not there yet. And the thing we're fighting for in the union at the moment is every hour worked is every hour paid. You know, that's the most important thing at the moment. Let's get paid for our overtime first, and then we'll work on reducing the hours in stage 2 of our BECTU cinematic universe.
I think that's the key, because if it's certainly in TV drama, there's definitely this disparity between what happens on set with overtime and what happens post with overtime. If you're on set and you go into overtime, the automatic thing is, well, we're going to pay you overtime, because it's so much easier to unionize when you're such a big group of people all there. But in post, if you want to get paid overtime, whether you've done it or not, there's like a fight to get paid it. You know, people, in one hand, it's like, well, this needs to be done for tomorrow. And in some sense of, well, you should have asked my permission if you wanted to work those extra hours and get paid for them. So a lot of the time, because something needs getting done, you just do it, and you just don't even ask for the extra money. And that's not the way to go. You know, I can't believe I said that in like a BECTU talk. You know, it's not right. And I think when we fix that, I think when production companies have to pay you for every single hour that you work, then suddenly the longer days won't happen as much, because they don't want to pay that overtime in the first place, and workflows might be kind of managed. But it is getting better. It's definitely getting better.
And just to make sure everyone has the full up-to-date information, you know, in the last 5 years, we've made leaps and bounds in this for both high-end features and the different bands of TV. We have the agreements now for features with PACT, which have been agreed. We have the features with the TV, with PACT for TV drama as well. You know, the number of hours you work is supposed to be documented in your deal memo. Everything is laid out upfront for you, your overtime rate, how many hours you're working, you know, what your rate is, what your box is, if you're going to get it. And all these things are negotiable. You can talk to someone about them. You can talk to either your first, or you can talk to BECTU about them. And you do have a right to discuss this stuff and talk about things you're not happy with. But you have to do it at the beginning before you sign the paperwork. Once you've made the agreement, it's a lot more difficult to change it round. But it's important that you know about these things, so that if you're working on something that doesn't follow them, yet is signed up to them, you do have now a physical contract and a written piece of paper that tells you what you deserve, and you can ask for it. And that has empowered a lot of people in the last 5 years to do that, and people are doing it.
And a big thing is, if anyone's sort of just starting out and have maybe just got a trainee job and they want to check things on their contract, a big thing to check for is something called prep and wrap, which for people on set, it means like included in your rate is like setting up your camera, or, you know, kind of, you know, whatever it is that we call those. The idea is that we're not going to pay you extra for that. This is all one big bundle. Now, if you work in post-production, your prep and wrap is booting up the computer and shutting down the computer. There should be no prep and wrap in your contract. Someone tried to put 2.5 hours on mine once. I was like, you need to remove that. And like Riccardo said, you need to do that at the beginning, because it becomes much harder once you put your name on the dotted line.
And I think Nia, just correct me on the specifics of that, but I think we actually successfully negotiated prep and wrap out of these PACT-approved contracts with features and TV drama. Is that correct?
So the deal is that post-production and facilities don't work prep and wrap. It's not a thing. If someone's trying to get you to do it, they are taking liberties, and you should say no. So you need to listen to Naomi. It's not a thing. You don't do it. Don't start doing it, because it's a really, really nasty habit that has been bred along numerous years in other departments, and we're working tirelessly to get rid of it for them. What we have done is we've managed to completely cut off what's known as buyouts. I would also recommend that you don't do them. They're really bad. They drive your rate down. Someone can ask you to do whatever they want for however long they want you to do it for. And you know, if you have any questions around the boundaries of what to sign up to in terms of contracts, hours, rates, get in touch with us on either through BECTU or the Rough Assembly, and we can run through some really simple guidelines in terms of what to do and what not to do, and also just have a quick discussion around, you know, what's the difference between a passion project and that you're happy to do if everyone else is being paid the same, and another kind of project where basically someone is just taking you for a ride.
And it's also really important to know that just because these documents exist, you know, awareness of them is still a work in progress. You know, you can't rely on the people on the productions that are hiring you to know about these and to be following them to the letter. You need to be responsible for understanding your own deal memo and your contract, and understanding what's been negotiated by the union on the project you're working on, if it fits in the right category. And then you need to know what to clarify and speak to. Initially, you'd go to your first. And again, you know, the first knowing about this is also questionable. They may not know or be following these agreements. So at that point, if you don't have, this is just the real world of how it is. If, you know, if they aren't helping you and you're pretty confident that you're being asked to do more than you're contractually obligated to do, that is the point at which you would come to one of us in the Rough Assembly, myself as the secretary, Dan Roberts as the other secretary, Toby on comms, Meredith as chair. You can contact us privately through the email links on the website. You can explain your situation, and then we can look at the paperwork, make sure everything's as it should be, and clarify with you what you need to say to people, or how we talk on your behalf if needed. Because often it's not malicious, it's just lack of knowledge. They may not be aware that this is exactly what the document said. And I've spoken to people in the industry. I'm not going to bring up names or productions, but I know of instances where this has happened. And once the discussions have been done, and they've been done respectfully and professionally, the clarifications have happened, but did someone, you know, needed to take that first step. And often it's us just gently pointing out to them, this isn't quite what is in the paperwork.
Okay, guys, we have to wrap up now. So if there is let's maybe sign off on a happy, more light note, just because, you know, lockdown is hard enough as it is, and the industry, you know, is also having a tough time. So tell me who your favorite editor is. Go. Toby.
There's a guy called Simon Mason who basically helped me up the ladder. He's someone who works in documentaries, and he's fantastic and really lovely. He's basically like my TV dad.
Okay, perfect. Jasmin, go.
I'm going to say Mike Jones for a similar reason. He brought me up from trainee to second on his next job, and it was on a job that I loved. Yeah, Mike Jones.
Okay, thank you. Eleanor Adler, go.
Oh my God, I have no idea.
Riccardo?
No, I don't know.
Okay. I think
no, I was saying, is Riccardo your favorite editor?
Yeah, everyone on the panel.
Riccardo, go ahead. You?
My favorite editor, or like?
Yeah.
I think I'm committing career suicide if I don't say Eddie. Surely, then I think Eddie's a great editor. You know, I think some of his action editing in the Kingsman and Mission Impossible films is phenomenal, and I've learned so much by breaking his reels down and dissecting them on a frame by frame level. Also, I think the gentleman who edits for Denis Villeneuve at the moment is a phenomenal editor. I think is it Joe Walker? I'm having a proper brain freeze moment. Can someone correct me? I don't want to get the name wrong. Is it Joe Walker?
Yeah, we'll put that name down. Naomi, what about you?
Well, I've got to say Dom Strevens. He's the editor I work with pretty much all the time. He is so much fun to be around in the cutting room. He's a really kind person. All the kind of frustrations that we've talked about, he kind of really helps alleviate that and make sure things are working for everyone. And he buys me pastries in the morning sometimes. So
wonderful.
And he's a brilliant editor as well. He's a really fantastic performance editor, particularly if you've got like a heavy dialogue scene. The things he can do with that is just amazing.
Wonderful. Okay.
And I throw out Jeff Ford as well. Jeff Ford I think he's a really great editor for the Marvel stuff he does with the Avengers and Captain America. He's fantastic too.
I love how you're now like, oh, I'll just put 3 people out there so that I'm not like on the spot. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. It's all of a sudden 9:45. So, thank you, Naomi Smallwood, Jasmin John, Eleanor Adler, Toby Nutter, and Ricardo Bacigalupo. This has been recorded. It'll be available really shortly, won't it, Toby, on the Rough Assembly website. We have a fantastic webinar coming up next weekend, and that is dialogue and ADR editing for TV and film. That's with Rachel Tate, that's 1917, Alien, and The Martian. Callis Shamaris, who did The Crown and Utopia. Becky Ponting, No Time to Die, Darkest Hour, and The Two Popes. And Simon Chase, who did Mission Impossible, Fallout, Wonder Woman, and Skyfall. That is going to be chaired by Steve Little, who has worked on The Crown, Outlaw King, and Rush, and who is heading the BECTU committee for the post part of post-production. Sorry, the post-sound part of the post industry. So,
Nia, can we just mention the AGM as well, just so that people can listen in on that if they want to.
Yeah, absolutely. If you wanna take that off, then that's fine. And also, if you could remind people that if there are any non-members on the call tonight, they can join the branch for $7.50 a month for the first year.
Yes, non-members join because you get protected and you have access to all the things we've talked about, and you can contact the PPNF branch in the union. And we're really working hard to try and create a community that everyone can be a part of and just be protected, be passionate, love what they're doing, and engage, come meet us, talk to us. We all want to essentially be as big a happy family as we can in what we're doing. Regarding the AGM, for those of you who don't know, the AGM is the annual general meeting. Okay, so it happens every year, and it's where we all come together to plan sort of for the next year of what we want to try and achieve, and put forward the new committee, which is the 15 people who will basically represent post-production and facilities in what we're doing in our negotiations with PACT, in the way we engage with feature film producers to help protect everyone and fight for issues that matter to everyone. At the moment, we've got 15 people. Some will be returning, hopefully, based on the voting system. Some will be stepping down. So there are slots that are open, and anyone can put themselves forward, get nominated, and come on board. And we want to represent the whole industry. At the moment, we've got obviously some feature people, some TV people, high-end drama, factual. We've got Kat from short form, but we need to animation. We'd love to get some animation editors in. We want to represent as much of the industry as possible, because it's the only way we can help everybody move forward together. It will be on Zoom this year because of the pandemic again. And so you can get in touch with us at the Rough Assembly or via BECTU to find out more about how you can sit in. It's a general meeting, which means it's open to anyone who's a member. Is that right, Nia? Or
we would take non-members as well, but they would have to join upon entry.
Join on the night. Yeah. Okay. So
otherwise you don't get a vote.
Yeah, exactly. And then the committee, if you do end up being someone who comes into the committee, we also meet just the committee as well, where we talk about what we're trying to achieve for the year. Okay, so please just come get involved and help shape the industry that you're going to be a part of, hopefully. Okay, thanks guys.
Cool, amazing. Thank you so much. Eleanor Adler, thank you again for putting this together. The amount of work that you have been putting into
you, Eleanor.
These webinars has been phenomenal. And Jasmin and Naomi, very nice to meet you for the first time ever. Thank you so much for being brilliant panelists. And Toby Nutter and Riccardo, I get the pleasure of probably speaking to you tomorrow. Good night, everyone. Please stay safe. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night.